Native Americans struggled to survive. Note-taking study guide, page 204. The question we're going to answer is, what were the consequences of the conflicts between Native Americans and white settlers? First, people of the plains. And the amazing thing about the Plain Indians is that they actually lived for centuries just gathering wild foods, hunting, fishing. But when Europeans arrived, they introduced horses and guns. So most of the Plains nations began following buffalo herds, and that became their livelihood. They became much more nomadic in their society, and their society started revolving around buffalo herds rather than just hunting and gathering. There were many broken treaties, and I just put up some treaties of where the Sioux and the Cheyenne used to roam, and then basically what became of their different territories. As Americans moved west, U.S. officials tried to convince the Plain nations to stop following the buffalo and settle down permanently. And in 1851, they signed the Fort Laramie Treaty, and the U.S. government promised to protect Native American lands, but once the treaty was signed, it was just ignored, and settlers began moving onto Native American lands anyways. In 1864, Colonial John Shivington attacked a band of Cheyennes at Sand Creek. The Sand Creek Massacre helped ignite an era of war with the Plain Indians. And so there's a picture of the Black Hills on the left there, and different leaders, and then also the ghost dance we're going to talk about as well. Southern Plain nations were moved to reservations in Oklahoma. Life there was a disaster because of poor soil, and this made farming really quite difficult. Many Sioux and Cheyennes gathered on land set aside for them in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Unfortunately, when gold was found in 1874, many miners started just ignoring that it was their land and coming in. And the Black Hills was considered sacred to the Sioux. And so Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, they led attacks to keep whites out. The Sioux, or Lakota, as they were known, were the plain peoples whose way of life was threatened and eventually destroyed. And these were the Sioux. Marion Sandals describes the customs and belief of the Sioux. Sandals herself grew up on the Nebraska frontier, and she heard stories about the past from trappers, ranchers, and Native Americans. I'm going to take a minute to read this section and answer the questions that will follow. In 1876, General George Armstrong Custer tried to force, so General Custer as we would call him, force Native Americans onto a reservation, and he and all his men died at the Battle of Little Bighorn. The Native Americans, the Sioux, suffered no casualties. Chief Joseph led the Nez Perce to Canada. The U.S. Army caught the Nez Perce near Canada, and Chief Joseph surrendered. After years of war, the Navajo were defeated in 1864 in Arizona. They were forced to move to a spot near the Pecos River in Arizona. And by the late 1880s, Native Americans across the Great Plains began forming the ghost dance. They believed that their ancestors and buffalo would return, and this would cause the white people to leave the plains. Soldiers and Americans saw this as an uprising, and during the ensuing struggles, Sitting Bull was killed. And later, the troops nearly killed 200 Sioux men, women, and children, mostly women and children, at the Battle of Wounded Knee. So the effects of this was that by this time, Native Americans have been pretty much all forced onto reservations and abandoned their way of life and also their ancestral homeland. There were efforts to reform. Congress passed the Dawes Act in 1887. This gave Native American men 160 acres to farm and set up schools for Native American children, but the measure failed because Native Americans didn't take to farming. They wanted to keep following the buffalo herds that at this point were almost extinct.